Captain Ray Calder reclined in the worn pilot's chair of his beloved freighter, the starbound Rogue, letting his fingertips tap rhythmically on the control panel as the engines hummed in the background. He had just navigated a particularly hairy stretch of asteroid field on the fringe of the Velmara system, and now, with sweat still dotting his brow, he gazed upon the slender, crystalline artifact that gleamed under the cockpit lights. From the moment he'd accepted this contract, a sense of unease had gnawed at him. King Tavir of Velmara, a monarch known for his formidable leadership and rumored spiritual powers, had offered him triple his usual rate, yet no explanation for what the artifact did, or why it was so valuable, had ever been forthcoming. Ray was hardly a stranger to high-stakes deliveries, but something about this job felt different. The item's faint luminescence tugged at his thoughts, as if whispering secrets he wasn't meant to hear. King Tavir must really want this thing, Ray muttered, flipping a series of switches to initiate autopilot. He swung out of his chair, boots echoing against the steel floor as he made his way to the cargo hold. There, perched upon a pedestal and encased in a protective force field, the artifact shimmered with a mesmerizing light. It was roughly the length of his forearm, shaped like a spire, and in certain angles, it seemed to be made of pure, living starlight. No matter how many times he told himself to keep his distance, he found his eyes drawn to it again and again. "Try not to obsess, Ray," he said under his breath, rubbing the back of his neck. Overthinking led to mistakes. When you deliver it, you're done. Normally, upon acquiring unusual cargo, he'd run a few scans, tap into the black market rumor mill, or glean some intel from a friend in the Federation. But King Tavir had insisted on absolute secrecy, threatening to double any competitor's offer if Ray so much as took a single reading. If that threat had come from a lesser man, Ray might have ignored it. But Tavir was not just any royal. He was said to wield both political and mystical influence. From the vantage point of an independent freighter pilot, that was all Ray needed to stay prudent. Velmara itself appeared on the forward display the next morning, a swirling planet of pale lavender and turquoise clouds. Graceful rings encircled it, like luminous ribbons in the cosmic night. Approaching its upper atmosphere, Ray found himself genuinely impressed. He'd visited a dozen regal worlds, each with its own pretensions and extravagances, but the pastel swirl of Velmara drew him in. He felt as though he were dipping into a dream. A haughty air traffic controller's voice crackled through the comm. "Identify yourself, inbound vessel. King Tavir requests your presence at the Royal Skyport." "This is Captain Ray Calder, of the starbound Rogue," Ray replied, giving the standard credentials and verifying the special clearance code. A short silence followed, filled with faint static. "Proceed to designated docking bay, Captain. The king awaits you." The voice had a reverential, almost anxious tone. Ray cut the connection and guided his vessel through the planetary ring system, weaving between chunks of ice and cosmic debris. Soon, a towering city of crystalline spires and floating platforms gleamed below. He marveled at the architecture, arcs of prismatic stone, columns that seemed too delicate to hold up entire structures, and bridges suspended by gravitational fields that shimmered in hues of pink and gold. Docking was surprisingly smooth, despite the swirling updrafts that surrounded the platform. Once he'd landed, Ray went through his usual post-flight checks, though he suspected the local ground crew would have their own elaborate process. He glanced back at the artifact, ensuring it was secure. The cargo hatch hissed open, revealing a welcoming party of Velmaran guards, each dressed in ceremonial armor that gleamed like mother of pearl. The guards bowed in unison. "Welcome, Captain Calder," said their leader, a tall figure with pale turquoise skin and violet eyes. "His Majesty awaits in the Grand Hall. If you will follow me." Ray nodded and stepped onto the polished metal walkway. The city around him was alive with gentle lights reflecting off crystalline walls, turning every corner into a symphony of color. Velmaran citizens, tall and graceful, moved about with deliberate poise, some wearing robes of translucent fabric, others in more practical attire. Occasionally, one would glance at Ray with open curiosity. He supposed the arrival of an off-world freighter pilot, especially one in direct business with the king, was something of an oddity. They made their way through a gate framed by ornate carvings of cosmic creatures, leading to a circular plaza. At its center stood a fountain that sprayed glowing water into the air, each droplet reflecting tiny rainbows. Surrounding this fountain were tall columns, shaped to resemble twisted vines, and overhead, a dome with a carved mosaic of the Velmara star cluster. The artistry took Ray's breath away. He felt dwarfed by the scale and intricacy of everything around him. Soon, he was guided through an archway into the grand hall itself. A hush seemed to fall in this space, like a cathedral carved from living gemstone. Rows of elaborately garbed courtiers flanked the aisle, each bowing deeply as Ray and his escort passed. At the far end of the hall sat King Tavir on a dais, robed in shimmering white cloth, his lavender face framed by a crest of silver hair. Two tall braziers burned with mystical blue fire on either side of him, and behind his throne hung a massive tapestry depicting Velmara's storied history. Ray carefully set the artifact on a ceremonial table before the king. He tried to suppress a flicker of nerves as he bowed, a gesture of respect he hoped would suffice. "Your Majesty, I am Captain Ray Calder, delivering the cargo as promised." King Tavir rose, and Ray was struck by the monarch's piercing gaze. It carried a gravity that made him feel like every molecule of his being was under scrutiny. At length, the king nodded. "We are pleased. You have done well, Captain. Our people have waited many cycles for this artifact's return." His voice was deep and resonant, echoing slightly in the grand chamber. Ray half smiled. "I'm glad to hear that, Your Majesty. Now, if everything is in order, I'll just take my leave. I have many other." "Not so fast, Captain," said a clear, melodic voice from behind the throne. A figure stepped forward, tall, slender, and graceful, with silver-white hair cascading like moonlight. Her violet eyes shone with curiosity, and though she wore the formal regalia befitting her station, there was an unmistakable vibrancy to her expression. Ray recognized her at once from the local news bulletins. Princess Lyra, King Tavir's only child, and the rumored heir to the Velmara throne. Though she had the elegance one might expect of a royal, there was a spark of boldness in her posture. On many worlds, rebellious princesses were a dime a dozen in stories, but rarely had Ray encountered one so openly, especially in the presence of the king. "Princess," Ray acknowledged, bowing again. To his surprise, she returned a polite, yet faintly mischievous smile. In a measured tone, she addressed him. "Captain Calder, you have brought an item of great significance to our realm. Such generosity, however well paid, deserves more than a mere thank you. Would you do me the honor of—" She paused, stepping closer, her slender hand extended. Ray, uncertain of the local custom, offered his own in return. The instant their palms met, Ray felt a strange energy pulse through his body, like a mild electric shock but tinged with warmth. He gasped, while the courtiers around them murmured in astonishment. King Tavir's eyes widened slightly. Princess Lyra withdrew her hand, her cheeks tinted a gentle lavender, which Ray assumed was a sign of embarrassment, or something else. "What was that?" he asked, flexing his fingers as if to confirm he could still feel them. Princess Lyra exchanged a guarded look with her father. The king studied Ray for a moment. "Daughter, you have greeted him in the traditional manner? Are you certain?" His voice resonated through the hall, a hint of anxiety creeping in. Lyra gave a faint nod. I did not realize the artifact would be present. Its aura may have sealed our gesture in a more binding way." Ray blinked, perplexed. "Binding? I'm not sure I follow." He glanced around at the courtiers, who seemed both intrigued and uneasy. With a reluctant sigh, King Tavir addressed the assembled crowd. "Leave us." The hall emptied in an orderly fashion, velvet robes and ceremonial armor whispering across the ornate floor. Soon, only Ray, Princess Lyra, the king, and a few armed guards remained. The monarchy was clearly taking no chances. Once they stood alone, King Tavir descended the dais, each step measured. He paused, examining Ray's eyes. "Captain Calder, our culture holds traditions older than the citadels you have seen in our skies. One of these traditions concerns the introduction of a suitable partner into the royal lineage. The handshake you have just shared with my daughter is no ordinary greeting. In the presence of certain sacred energies, like those found in the artifact you delivered, this contact signifies a betrothal rite." Ray felt the blood drain from his face. "A betrothal rite? Are you saying I just got engaged to your daughter?" Princess Lyra stepped forward, her voice low but determined. It was not my intention to entrap you, Captain. I had hoped to speak to you privately, to inform you of certain intricacies. My father arranged for you to bring this artifact, knowing its resonance. I suspect he planned for us to meet in exactly this manner. Ray stared at the two of them, heart hammering in his chest. Wait, so this was a setup? The king hired me to deliver the artifact, and the moment I show up, I'm engaged to the princess. He clenched his fists, fighting a mixture of outrage and confusion. That's insane. King Tavir's expression was grim. Traditions can be burdensome, but they are the cornerstone of Velmaran society. Once a handshake in the presence of that artifact is complete, it sets in motion an ancient contract. To break it is punishable by law, and, in some interpretations, punishable by death. Ray's ears rang. He tried to laugh, to scoff at the absurdity, but the severity of the king's gaze destroyed any hint of humor. Punishable by death? Your Majesty, I am a simple freelancer. I have no business marrying into your royal family. Lyra's gaze flickered with sympathy. I understand, Captain. Truly, I do not wish to force you into anything. But tradition dictates that if you do not complete the courtship ritual, you forfeit your life. Our laws, as ancient as the crystals of our world, offer no mercy on that front. There is, however, one alternative. King Tavir folded his arms, the regal robe shifting softly. Should you wish to avoid an immediate marriage, you may invoke the 3 trials, a path by which an unprepared or unwilling partner can demonstrate suitability or refute the engagement. If you pass these trials and still refuse the engagement, you go free without penalty. But be warned, the trials are known to be impossible. Ray exhaled, trying to quell the panic churning inside him. And if I fail? The king's eyes bored into him. Then your life is forfeit. The only other choice is to accept the marriage. One way or another, our ancient laws demand resolution. Ray shifted his gaze to Lyra, who studied him with a mixture of empathy and tension. This is madness, he whispered, half to himself. But, if these are my only choices, I have to try. I won't just resign myself to a forced marriage, and I certainly don't intend to die here. I choose the trials. King Tavir nodded solemnly, as if he had expected no less. So be it, Captain Calder. The first trial shall begin at dawn. Escorted from the grand hall by a pair of silent guards, Ray walked the opulent corridors in a haze of confusion. Intricate mosaics glowed faintly on the walls, though he scarcely noticed. The knowledge that his life, or his freedom, hung on 3 so-called impossible trials weighed heavily on him. He cursed himself for not looking more carefully into King Tavir's request, for not suspecting something was amiss the moment that triple payment was offered. Before he could think of a plan, or even a quiet corner to gather his thoughts, he was led to a guest chamber in the royal palace. The room was extravagant, with high ceilings that shimmered in pale moonlight from overhead skylights. A bed covered in satin drapes sat in the center, and a small fountain gurgled softly in one corner. As soon as the guards departed, locking the door behind them, Ray tried to calm his breath. He paced in circles, heart pounding, occasionally pausing at the window to stare out at the city. Velmara at night was even more breathtaking than during the day, with swirling auroras dancing across the horizon. Buildings made of translucent crystals captured the moonbeams, giving them a soft, magical glow. He pressed a palm to the cold glass, longing for the cramped, comforting cockpit of the starbound rogue. Suddenly, a knock sounded at the door. Ray tensed. Had the king come to press him for an answer? Did they intend to imprison him overnight, or drug him to ensure he couldn't flee? He opened the door to find Princess Lyra standing there alone. She wore a simple cloak, her face half hidden under its hood. "May I come in?" she asked softly. Ray hesitated, but stepped aside to let her enter. Once inside, Lyra removed the hood, revealing her concerned expression. "I had to see you," she whispered. "I want to explain." "Explain what?" he said, fighting to keep the resentment from his voice. "That your father tricked me? That I'm now stuck in some archaic royal ritual?" She took a few steps forward, her features illuminated by the soft glow of the fountain. "I can't deny that I sensed some manipulation on my father's part, but I didn't realize you would be drawn into it so abruptly. I had hoped to speak with you privately before the ceremony, to warn you. Instead, you extended your hand, So innocently. And now we're both caught in this predicament. Predicament, Ray repeated, rolling the word around in his head. It felt like too gentle a term for his situation. So, these 3 trials, what can you tell me about them? Are they truly impossible, or is that just palace propaganda? Lyra's eyes glimmered with empathy. They're designed to test not just physical prowess, but also resourcefulness, loyalty, and heart. Many of our legends date back centuries, to a time when suitors fought to prove themselves worthy of ruling alongside Velmara's heirs. In modern times, no one has attempted the trials, at least not seriously. Most who are forced into this situation simply choose to wed, accepting the enormous political advantage. To my knowledge, no off-worlder has attempted them, or survived them. Ray pulled a hand through his hair, panic creeping back in. Great. I'm the first alien to attempt the trials, and apparently, no one else has done it in living memory. That's encouraging. Lyra reached out, placing a gentle hand on his arm. A subtle warmth passed through him, and he realized for the first time how sincere her eyes appeared, how genuine her worry seemed. I know it seems bleak, but if anyone can figure out a way, it might be you. You navigated an asteroid field to get here. You're adaptable, resourceful. You even delivered that artifact without a single mishap. He swallowed the urge to snap that her father's manipulations had left him no choice. Instead, he nodded slowly. Why are you telling me this? You stand to gain a reluctant husband if I fail. Doesn't that help your father's position? Lyra drew back. I do not wish to hold any man or any person to a union they do not desire. If my father's plan is to entrap you, then he's let his ambition cloud his compassion. I would rather help you than watch you die. Ray studied her a moment, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Do you have any idea what the first trial is? She hesitated, biting her lip. The rite of the veil is often the first. According to the legends, the suitor must journey through the labyrinth of echoes hidden beneath the palace. You must reach the central chamber and retrieve a relic called the silver scepter. This scepter, when lifted, unveils the hidden truth of the labyrinth. The labyrinth itself shifts like a living being, rearranging corridors, conjuring illusions. Some say it preys on your fears and regrets. Ray groaned inwardly. Sounds like a nightmare. Is there any chance you can accompany me, help me navigate? She shook her head. No, the trials must be faced alone. But I can offer advice. The labyrinth is rumored to respond to calm. If you let panic overtake you, the corridors will twist into impossible patterns. If you keep a steady mind, the path opens. A desperate laugh escaped him. Stay calm in a shifting nightmare. Right. Easy. He sank onto the edge of the bed, massaging his temples. I don't suppose there's a secret back door you can show me? Lyra managed a faint smile. If only. However, you'll find torches and some basic supplies outside the labyrinth entrance. The illusions can be harrowing. Rumor has it they're drawn from your subconscious, visions of your greatest fears, your deepest regrets. Ray found himself trembling despite his attempts at composure. He had no shortage of regrets. The memory of leaving behind his family at a young age still haunted him. The countless times he'd double-crossed powerful figures in his smuggling days. The panic of near-death in starship scrapes. Could the labyrinth latch onto all those nightmares? Lyra sensed his dread. She stepped closer and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. I wish I could spare you this, but the laws are absolute. If you can find the silver scepter and present it to the guard outside, you'll have passed the first trial, and we'll move on to the second. For now, rest. Gather your strength. Dawn comes quickly. He nodded absently, scarcely hearing her last words. Despite the plush bed, the silky linens, and the gentle fountain's lullaby, he doubted he'd manage much rest. Tomorrow, he would descend into an ancient labyrinth that fed on fear. He had no choice but to try, for if he didn't, King Tavir would imprison him, or worse. And the thought of forced marriage, while less immediately lethal, was equally unthinkable to a man who valued his independence above all else. As Lyra slipped out of the room, Ray lay back on the bed, stared up at the shimmering mosaic overhead, and tried to calm his racing mind. It would be a long night. Dawn in Velmara arrived with a gentle lavender light, spilling over the horizon and illuminating the city's crystalline towers until they shimmered like living jewels. Ray awakened, exhausted, though he'd scarcely slept more than a few hours. A pair of stern-faced guards came for him promptly at sunrise, instructing him to follow. They led him through a winding series of corridors, eventually descending a grand staircase that curved deep into the palace's lower levels. As they traveled down, the air grew cooler, the walls less ornate. Eventually, they reached a massive stone door inscribed with swirling symbols. Torches lined the walls, their blue flames flickering eerily. Standing before the door was an official in flowing robes, face partially obscured by a carved mask depicting some ancient deity. The official addressed Ray in a formal tone. "Captain Calder of the Starbound Rogue, by command of His Majesty King Tavir, you have chosen to undertake the 3 trials to earn your freedom from the betrothal contract. Know that the first trial, the Labyrinth of Echoes, has claimed many a soul. May your courage guide you." With that, 2 guards pushed the heavy door open, revealing a tunnel plunging into darkness. Ray swallowed hard, then stepped forward. Before he could enter, the official offered him a small satchel and a torch. "You will find rations and a flask of water, as well as a single flare to signal your success or call for mercy. Though calling for mercy will count as failure, and you will forfeit the trial. Good luck, Captain." Ray nodded and took a deep breath, preparing himself. The door rumbled shut behind him as he moved deeper into the labyrinth. His torch cast quivering shadows across the cold, stone corridors. The walls were etched with swirling lines, as though the entire place was carved by an artist's chisel. Occasional whispers, like distant breezes, echoed through the passage, sending shivers along his spine. He proceeded slowly, counting steps to keep track, but after a dozen yards, the corridor branched off into 2 equally dark tunnels. Each sloped downward at a slight angle. He paused, uncertain, then recalled Lyra's words, "Stay calm, or the labyrinth will twist against you." "No panicking," he whispered to himself, forcing measured breaths. He picked the left path, rationalizing it was as good as any, and advanced. The next few minutes were uneventful, with only the sound of his own footsteps echoing off the walls. Then a faint laugh, a child's laugh, echoed from behind him, jolting him to a stop. He spun, torch raised, but saw only darkness. A chill crawled along his arms. Was it a trick? An illusion from the labyrinth? He pressed on, ignoring the urge to run. The corridor opened into a small chamber with a domed ceiling. At the center stood a pedestal made of black marble. Curious, Ray approached, noticing a mosaic underfoot that resembled a cosmic spiral. As he neared the pedestal, a swirling mist materialized, reflecting faint images like ghostly memories. In that mist, he saw a younger version of himself, perhaps 12 years old, stowing away on a cargo freighter. He remembered that day all too well, the day he left his home planet, fleeing a life he found suffocating, hoping for freedom among the stars. The memory played out in silent pantomime, the smaller Ray clutching a worn bag, face streaked with tears. "Don't look at this," he muttered, tearing his gaze away. He had not wanted to remember those moments. Even so, the illusions continued to swirl, showing him parted family members, people he'd left behind for the promise of adventure. His guilt flared, lodging like a stone in his chest. He had regrets, things he'd never told them, words unspoken. Fighting the wave of sorrow, he reached the pedestal, hoping to find some tangible clue. Instead, he saw an empty recess shaped like a cup or scepter base. The silver scepter might belong there, he reasoned. But if so, where was it? "Calm, Ray," he reminded himself. These illusions feed on doubt. He saw the ghostly image of his mother's tearful face vanish into the mist. Shaking his head to dispel the pang of guilt, he retraced his steps back into one of the corridors leading out of the chamber. For what felt like hours, he wandered through a maze of spiraling passages. Each time he took a turn, the labyrinth seemed to shift. Occasionally, he caught glimpses of flickering shapes in the corner of his vision, shadows with no apparent source, mocking laughter that died quickly in the darkness. He drank water sparingly, worried he might need it if the labyrinth continued to twist his path. Eventually, he emerged into another chamber, larger and more imposing than the first. Torches burned in sconces along the walls, casting an eerie, dancing light. At the room's center lay a chasm filled with swirling mists. A single stone bridge, narrow and treacherous, spanned the gap. On the far side, Ray could just make out a large door inscribed with yet more symbols. If there was a path to the next area, it likely led through that door. He approached the bridge and peered into the mists below. Nothing but swirling darkness. He tested the first step on the stone, which seemed sturdy enough. Carefully, inch by inch, he advanced. Halfway across, the labyrinth's illusions attacked his mind. He heard voices, friends he'd lost over the years, mentors he'd disappointed, haunting accusations. The stone under his feet felt slick, as though coated in oil. He paused, eyes squeezed shut, focusing on his breath. Voices hissed in his ears, "Traitor, drifter, you never belonged anywhere." He trembled, forcing himself to move forward, foot by foot. The illusions intensified, swirling forms emerging from the mists, ghostly silhouettes of people from his past. They reached for him with pale hands, as though begging him to return, to face them. He nearly lost his footing when one shape whispered, "You should have come back, Ray. We needed you." A wave of shame washed over him. Heart hammering, he steadied himself. "I can't change the past," he whispered through clenched teeth. "But I can survive the present." He forced himself onward, each step deliberate, until finally he reached the far side. The illusions receded the moment he touched solid ground. Panting, he gripped the door's handle, noticing that his knuckles were white. He had to keep going. The door opened into a winding corridor that terminated in another circular room, though this one had a vaulted ceiling reminiscent of a shrine. At its center stood an altar, and on the altar rested a scepter of gleaming silver. Ray's heart leapt. This had to be the silver scepter. Carefully, he approached, half expecting a trap. As he drew near, the scepter emitted a faint hum, and a swirl of light danced along its length. The swirling illusions in the labyrinth walls quivered, almost as if anticipating his next move. He extended his hand, gripping the scepter's cool metal, and lifted it from the altar. Instantly, the floor trembled, and the circular room began to rotate. The illusions on the walls dissolved, replaced by a warm, silvery glow emanating from the scepter. Then a passage opened in the far wall, one that hadn't been there a moment ago. Ray wasted no time. He held the scepter in one hand, the torch in the other, and bolted down the new passage. To his relief, the corridor was short, ending at a stairway that climbed upward. Rays of sunlight filtered through a grate above. He ascended, pushing against a door overhead, which swung open into a courtyard behind the palace. Guards stood on either side, eyes widening as he emerged. In a moment of relief, Ray lifted the scepter for them to see. The official who had greeted him earlier rushed forward, astonished. He did it. He found the silver scepter. The official reached out to confirm it was real, then nodded gravely. The labyrinth has been conquered, at least enough to retrieve the relic. The first trial is complete. Ray exhaled shakily, dropping to his knees as the tension flooded out of him. He had done it, survived the illusions, faced the labyrinth. Now only 2 more trials remained, equally, or perhaps even more dangerous. But for that moment, he allowed himself a fleeting sense of victory. The midday sun shone brightly on Velmara's skyline as Ray was escorted back into the palace. Citizens clustered along balconies and walkways, whispering in surprise that a foreigner had passed the legendary labyrinth. Some even applauded politely. Ray found himself too exhausted to revel in the attention. He was taken to a healing chamber, where palace medics tended to a few minor scrapes and bruises. They offered him water infused with calming herbs, explaining that the labyrinth's illusions could linger in the mind if not properly cleansed. Ray gulped the water gratefully, feeling his anxiety subside into a more manageable level of wariness. Once he'd been treated, a royal attendant informed him that King Tavir awaited him for a brief audience. With weary steps, Ray followed the corridor toward the throne room. Along the way, he caught a glimpse of Princess Lyra in an adjacent hall. She offered him a soft, relieved smile and mouthed the words, "I knew you could do it." That simple gesture sent a ripple of warmth through his chest. At least he wasn't alone in this twisted predicament. The throne room was less crowded than the previous day, with only a small retinue of advisors and attendants. King Tavir stood at the base of the dais, arms folded. His expression was guarded, neither openly pleased nor disappointed. Ray halted and bowed stiffly, fighting back the temptation to say something sarcastic. "So, Captain," said the king, voice echoing in the vaulted space. You have triumphed over the labyrinth of echoes. Few in the history of Velmara have done so. I commend your courage. Ray eyed him, torn between frustration and an odd sense of pride. Thank you, Your Majesty. I hope this means I'm one step closer to concluding these trials successfully. King Tavir allowed a slight nod. Indeed. The second trial, however, will require you to leave the palace grounds. You must travel to the Valley of Tempests, where our ancestors once harnessed the power of cosmic storms. There, hidden among the jagged cliffs, lies the Oculus Stone, an artifact rumored to show one's future or one's doom. Retrieving it from the heart of the valley proves your resolve to see the future of Velmara or to face its possible destruction. Ray felt a sinking sensation in his stomach. A valley of cosmic storms? Sounds dangerous. Anything else I should know? An advisor stepped forward. The storms that rage through the valley are unpredictable, enhanced by plasma discharges from the planet's core. Lightning, gale force winds, these are constant threats. Navigating the valley requires cunning and courage. Ray exhaled. Lovely. When do I leave? King Tavir's gaze flicked to an attendant, who handed Ray a scroll. The directions to the valley are inscribed here, along with the known safe paths. You depart in the morning. Speak with the quartermaster in the royal armory. He will provide you gear suitable for the journey. With that, the king dismissed him. As Ray turned to leave, Princess Lyra emerged from a side door, beckoning him discreetly. He glanced back to see if the king noticed, but Tavir had already ascended the dais to consult with an advisor. Lyra guided Ray into a small chamber lined with ancient texts, a private library, lit by tall windows of stained glass. She shut the door behind them, resting her hands on an ornate table. "Are you all right?" she asked, concern evident. Ray released a long breath. "I've been better, but I'm still alive." He took a moment to examine the room, noting shelves filled with scrolls and thick tomes, likely centuries old. Light filtered through the colored glass, painting the space in warm reds and golds. Lyra placed a hand over his, her voice soft. "I'm proud you survived the labyrinth. I never doubted you, but I worried for you." He felt a twinge of gratitude. "Your advice helped. Staying calm, trying not to let the illusions take hold. If you hadn't told me about the labyrinth's nature, I might still be lost in there." She squeezed his hand gently, then gestured to the shelves. "My father believes in upholding ancient traditions, often without question. But I believe knowledge can break the chains of fear. Let's see if the library can help you survive the second trial." Ray followed her as she navigated the rows of aging manuscripts. Eventually, she pulled out a worn, leather-bound volume with a stylized lightning bolt embossed on its cover. "Here it is," she whispered. "Storm Lore of Velmara. This text details the cosmic storms in the Valley of Tempests. It might have clues for safe passage or ways to mitigate the lightning discharges." They laid the book on the table and flipped through its brittle pages. Intricate diagrams and swirling symbols filled the margins. The language was archaic, but Lyra translated the critical passages. A cluster of conductive spires can redirect lightning. Travelers must ground themselves. The storms respond to certain resonant frequencies. She paused, pointing to a diagram of a small device shaped like a tuning fork. "This might be key. The text says carrying a harmonic resonator can lull the storm's fury if you match its pitch to the wind's howling." Ray leaned forward. "So, if I could get my hands on one of those resonators, I might be able to reduce the chaos of the storm?" Lyra nodded. "Yes, or at least navigate more safely. But the text also suggests you'll have to climb partway up the cliffs of Avon to find a vantage point where the storm's center is visible. The Oculus Stone is said to lie in a hidden alcove there. The challenge is reaching it without being blown off by the gales." Ray grimaced. "I'm not exactly a seasoned climber." She gave him a sympathetic half-smile. "I can arrange for some climbing gear. But be cautious. Even with every advantage, the storms can be fatal. If you retrieve the Oculus Stone, the second trial will be considered complete. And then, the final trial awaits." Ray drummed his fingers on the table, scanning the archaic diagrams. "I need to get through this. Then maybe we can figure out a way to end this whole ordeal without a forced marriage." Lyra lowered her gaze. "I understand. Whatever your reasons, I respect them." A moment of silence stretched between them, and Ray felt a swirl of conflicting emotions. Part of him resented the entire situation, the king's trickery, the looming possibility of death. Another part noticed how genuinely Lyra seemed to care, how she seemed caught in her father's web as much as he was. He pushed those thoughts aside for now. Survival took precedence. They continued combing through the Stormlore text, jotting down relevant details. By the time they finished, warm afternoon light had shifted to the soft hues of evening. Lyra placed the tome back in its place. I'll have a messenger bring the climbing gear and a resonator to the armory for you. You'll leave at dawn. Ray nodded. Yes. The king wants me gone as soon as possible, and I won't argue. I appreciate your help, princess. For a moment, her expression flickered between a formal, royal demeanor and something more earnest. Be safe, Ray, she said softly. He gave her a small nod, heart pounding faster than it should. Then, he slipped out of the private library and made his way to his chambers to rest. Sunrise found Ray outside the palace gates, armed with the gear Lyra had arranged, a sturdy harness, climbing tools, a small grappling hook, and a device that resembled a metallic fork, labeled a harmonic resonator. A handful of palace scouts escorted him to the outskirts of the capital, where he was provided with a swift hoverbike to cross the Velmaran plains. Once he reached the valley's edge, the real ordeal would begin. The journey across open terrain took most of the morning. Velmara's countryside was stunning. Rolling hills blanketed with silver-green grass, dotted with crystalline rock formations that caught the sunlight in dazzling bursts. Yet, in the distance, dark storm clouds loomed, flickering with electric discharges. As he drew closer, the wind picked up, carrying the smell of ozone. By midday, Ray reached a sheer drop that marked the start of the Valley of Tempests. Jagged cliffs surrounded a wide basin, where swirling black clouds churned overhead. Occasionally, a bolt of lightning would lance down, striking one of the rocky spires that jutted from the valley floor. The air vibrated with raw energy, and thunderous booms echoed off the cliff walls. With a steadying breath, Ray dismounted the hoverbike and approached a narrow path leading downward. The path was flanked by crumbling stone steps, some half-worn by centuries of wind and rain. He activated the harmonic resonator, turning a dial until it emitted a low hum. For a moment, it seemed the wind lessened, as if listening. But another crash of thunder reminded him that this place would not be easily tamed. He descended carefully, pressing himself against the cliff whenever the wind gusted. An hour passed in slow, methodical progress. Twice he slipped, small rocks skittering down into the swirling fog below, but the harness secured him to a metal piton hammered into the rock. By the time he reached the valley floor, his arms were shaking, both from adrenaline and the physical exertion of controlling his descent. Once on the ground, he scanned the horizon. The swirling storms made it hard to see more than a few hundred yards. He pulled out the ancient scroll King Tavir had given him. According to the map, the Oculus Stone was hidden in a cave near the mid-levels of the cliffs of Avon, on the valley's far side. That meant crossing the storm-lashed basin, navigating rocky outcroppings, and scaling an even more treacherous cliff face. Lightning flashed, accompanied by a deafening crack. Ray ducked, though the bolt struck some spire in the distance. He advanced, mindful of his footing, the resonator humming softly at his side. The wind howled, buffeting him. On more than one occasion, he wondered whether any human, or Velmaran, for that matter, could survive such fury. The next few hours tested his resolve. Loose rocks turned into jagged ridges. Forks of electricity danced in the sky, sometimes hitting the ground with enough force to split boulders. The resonator's pitch shifted with the wind, occasionally dampening the lightning overhead. It was as if it calmed the storm momentarily, but the respite never lasted long. Eventually, he reached a narrow canyon that cut through a towering rock face. Judging from the map, this canyon led straight to the base of the cliffs of Avon. He inched inside, relieved to find some shelter from the worst of the wind. Here, echoes of rolling thunder resonated off the canyon walls, but at least the gale wasn't hurling him sideways. Near the canyon's center, he came upon a small alcove, where a trickle of water ran down the rocks. Exhausted, he allowed himself a brief rest, refilling his flask and gulping the cold liquid. His mind drifted to thoughts of Princess Lyra, the look of concern in her eyes. She was a stranger, and yet her sincerity comforted him more than he expected. Shaking off any sentimentality, he reminded himself of his purpose. Pressing on, he finally emerged from the canyon to face the imposing cliffs that soared above him like a fortress wall. Streams of water cascaded down from the storm-lashed heights, forming waterfalls in some sections. Others were craggy, almost vertical. The route indicated on the map showed a winding ledge partway up. That ledge, he hoped, would guide him to the cave containing the Oculus stone. Steeling himself, Ray readied his climbing gear. The wind whipped across the cliff, sending droplets of rain stinging against his cheeks. He hammered in the first piton, tested its stability, and began his ascent. Each step was a battle against slick stone and unpredictable gusts. Lightning crackled in the sky, and thunder reverberated through the rock face, as if the very bones of Velmara roared with ancient power. Halfway up, his progress slowed as the ledge narrowed. Twice, his boots slipped on wet rock, nearly sending him plummeting if not for the harness and pitons. He fought panic, remembering the labyrinth's illusions. Panic was the enemy. Calm. One piton at a time, one step at a time. After what felt like an eternity, he reached a small plateau. Heart pounding, he peered over the edge into the swirling valley below. He was high enough to see the curvature of the canyon, the swirling storms like a living monster raging across the land. Above him, another stretch of cliff rose, but here a dark opening in the rock beckoned, no more than 20 feet up. Summoning his last reserves of strength, he scaled the final distance. The cave opening was narrow, partially obscured by hanging vegetation, which had managed to cling to the rocky face. He slipped inside, dragging himself onto a relatively flat floor. The wind howled outside, but here, within the cave, it was eerily quiet. Torchlight revealed ancient carvings on the walls, spirals, stars, and depictions of figures holding a circular stone that seemed to glow in the images. The Oculus stone. At the cave's rear stood a natural pillar, and atop it, cushioned by a ring of carved rock, lay a perfectly round crystal the size of a melon. It glowed faintly, pulses of blue and white swirling in its depths. Ray approached, heart pounding. This had to be it. He reached out, brushing his fingers over the smooth, cool surface of the sphere. Energy tingled under his fingertips, reminiscent of the artifact he'd delivered to King Tavir, though this felt more potent, almost alive. As he lifted the Oculus stone, a sudden tremor ran through the cave. Chips of rock fell from the ceiling. Alarmed, Ray realized the storm outside might be intensifying, or the removal of the stone had triggered some ancient mechanism. Either way, he had to get out, fast. Cradling the stone, he backtracked toward the entrance. The wind outside roared, peppering him with rain and debris. He carefully secured the stone in a makeshift sling he'd fashioned from cloth, then eased himself back onto the cliff face. Climbing down with one arm always on the stone was going to be harrowing. As he descended, the storm unleashed its fury. Lightning struck perilously close, and the wind threatened to pry him from the cliff. He fumbled with the resonator, adjusting the dial. It emitted a sharp tone that seemed to deflect a bolt of lightning mid-strike, sending it crashing into a distant ridge instead. Grateful, Ray clung to the rock, descending one agonizing foot at a time. At last, he reached the canyon floor. The valley's swirling mists and cacophonous thunder enveloped him, but he pressed on, hugging the canyon wall for shelter. Step by step, he retraced his path, ignoring fatigue gnawing at his limbs. He would rest only when he was out of the valley. Hours later, he finally glimpsed the jagged mouth of the valley exit. Slipping through a howling gap in the cliffs, he emerged onto the open plains. There, in the distance, sat his hoverbike where he'd left it. Collapsing to his knees, stone cradled against his chest, he let out a ragged laugh of relief. The second trial was complete. He had the Oculus stone. Returning to the palace took until late afternoon of the following day, his journey interrupted by a night spent in a small rural outpost where he managed to rest and treat his battered hands. The outpost's Velmaran inhabitants were awestruck to see the Oculus stone. Word traveled quickly, and by the time he reached the palace gates, a crowd had gathered to witness his triumphant return. Princess Lyra awaited him at the entrance, relief and admiration shining in her eyes. "You're alive," she murmured, as if she had feared otherwise. "And you have the stone." Ray managed a wan grin, handing the stone off to one of the palace stewards. His entire body ached, clothes torn, face smeared with dust and mud. Yeah, that valley wasn't exactly a picnic, but I made it. Where's your father? She gestured for him to follow. In the great council chamber. He has been unsettled by your success. I believe he expected you to fail one of the trials. They navigated the palace halls, eventually arriving at a vaulted chamber where King Tavir and a circle of advisors stood gathered around a large, crystalline table. A hush fell as Ray entered, the oculus stone carried behind him by a steward. Tavir's gaze flicked between Ray's disheveled form and the stone's pulsing glow. You have succeeded, the king said, voice echoing in the chamber. His expression was a complex mix of surprise and something akin to respect. The second trial is complete. You are more tenacious than I anticipated. Ray dipped his head, too tired for formal pleasantries. Now only the final trial remains, correct? A murmur passed among the advisors. Tavir dismissed them with a curt wave, and soon, Ray, Lyra, and the king stood alone. Tavir regarded Ray solemnly. Indeed, according to our laws, the last trial is the trial of the heart, a test of one's devotion to our realm and to its future. But in truth, this trial can take many forms. Ray arched an eyebrow, glancing at Lyra for clues. She looked equally uncertain. What sort of test are we talking about? The king gestured toward an alcove lined with tapestries, each depicting historical moments in Velmara's lineage. In ancient times, the suitor would prove their worthiness by offering a sacrifice of something they cherished, demonstrating their willingness to prioritize the kingdom above personal gain. Yet, our modern interpretation lacks clarity. The law states only that the final test must prove the candidate's genuine commitment to Velmara. Given your intention not to marry my daughter, I wonder how you will interpret this trial. Ray's throat tightened. He'd come this far, survived illusions, climbed storm-racked cliffs, and now faced a nebulous test of devotion. Devotion he did not truly feel. Did that mean certain failure? Before Ray could respond, Princess Lyra spoke up, voice ringing with quiet confidence. Father, if the final trial requires Captain Calder to demonstrate his genuine care for Velmara, perhaps we can design a challenge that tests his compassion rather than his willingness to suffer personal loss. Tavir considered her words, frowning. And what do you propose, daughter? She took a measured breath, as if gathering courage. Our southwestern provinces have been suffering from frequent tectonic flux events, causing tremors and cracking the farmland. The people there are in dire need of assistance. What if Captain Calder traveled to that region to prevent or mitigate a crisis? If he succeeds, it shows his dedication to our people's well-being, fulfilling the spirit of the trial of the heart. Ray blinked, surprised by the idea. It sounded more like relief work than a single heroic test, but it was tangible, and perhaps less perilous than braving illusions or cosmic storms. How can I help exactly? Lyra turned to him, hopeful. The artifact you delivered, the crystalline spire, may help stabilize the planet's geological energy if placed in a key location underground. But it must be carried through a network of lava tubes, deep beneath the southwestern plains, and activated with a special code. This is delicate, dangerous work, but it might save thousands of lives if successful. Tavir drummed his fingers on the table, hesitating. You suggest trusting him with the artifact again? It's a great risk. Ray stared back, exhaustion flaring into frustration. Your Majesty, if you want a test of my dedication, let me do this. I've come this far. If it spares innocent lives, I'll do everything I can. A profound silence stretched. Finally, the king's stern expression softened. Very well. We shall arrange for you to take the spire to the southwestern region. A royal engineer will accompany you with the code needed for activation. If you succeed, I will grant you freedom from the betrothal, honoring the final trial's completion. Relief poured through Ray like cool water on a blistering day. He nodded. Thank you, Your Majesty. But Tavir wasn't finished. He turned to his daughter. Lyra, you have placed great faith in this off-worlder. Perhaps it is time you accompanied him, to bear witness to his commitment and to ensure the artifact is used properly. Lyra blinked in surprise, but her voice remained steady. I would gladly go, Father. If this is to be the final trial, I wish to witness it myself. Ray hid his reaction, uncertain whether traveling with the princess was a blessing or a burden. The king inclined his head. So be it. You leave at dawn. Dawn found Ray and Princess Lyra boarding a sleek royal transport craft, its hull polished to a silvery sheen. A stoic Velmaran engineer named Alec accompanied them, carrying a small control device for the spire. Their destination lay several hundred miles away, in a region known for lush farmland and rolling hills, until recent tremors threatened to crack the ground open. The flight passed in thoughtful silence. Ray occasionally stole glances at Lyra, who sat gazing out the window, her expression pensive. He wondered what she was thinking, that perhaps if he succeeded, she'd be rid of a marriage she never wanted. If he failed, would she mourn him? Within a couple of hours, they arrived at a bustling settlement where the ground bore visible scars from recent geological shifts. Large fissures cut across fields, and makeshift bridges spanned cracks in the earth. Alarmed farmers waved them down. Princess Lyra, stepping into her royal role, moved among the people, reassuring them that a solution was at hand. Ray and Alec focused on the next phase, reaching the system of lava tubes beneath a nearby ridge. According to records, these tubes connected to the planet's subterranean energy flows. Placing the spire at a precise junction could stabilize the tectonic disruptions. By mid-afternoon, they trekked across uneven terrain to a jagged fissure leading underground. Darkness yawned below, and a hot, mineral-scented wind wafted up. Alec examined a handheld scanner, verifying the path. Lyra insisted on joining them. Despite Ray's concerns for her safety, she refused to stay behind. They descended carefully, flashlights cutting through the gloom. The tunnels echoed with a distant rumble, possibly molten rock shifting far below. Stalactites dripped glowing mineral water, creating a faintly bioluminescent effect on the cavern walls. Occasionally, a tremor rolled through the stone, making them pause, hearts pounding, until it subsided. Alec led the way, checking his scanner. We're looking for a chamber labeled as Vortex Node 7A in the old geological archives. The spire must be placed at the heart of that node. Ray supported the spire, which pulsed faintly, as though reacting to the planet's energies. His arms tired from carrying it, but he pressed on, determined. Lyra stayed close, shining her light to guide his steps. At one point, the tunnel narrowed, forcing them to crawl on hands and knees through a tight passage. Sweat beaded on Ray's brow as claustrophobia threatened to take hold. The memory of the labyrinth's illusion surfaced, but he shoved it aside. This was real. If he failed, the farmland above could crumble, dooming countless lives. After what felt like hours, the narrow passage opened into a vast cavern. Molten rock glimmered far below, casting flickers of orange and red on the walls. Giant crystal formations sprouted from the stone like the spines of a mythical beast. Alec's scanner beeped rapidly. This is it. Node 7A is directly below us. A series of natural stone steps spiraled downward, leading to a central platform that seemed almost too perfect to be natural. At the platform's center lay a circular depression, ringed by glyphs reminiscent of those on the spire. Ray eyed Lyra, who nodded, encouraging him to proceed. He moved carefully down the steps, mindful of the scorching heat rising from the molten lake below. At times, he had to pause to wipe sweat from his eyes. Once on the platform, he placed the spire into the circular depression. A faint hum filled the air, resonating with an eerie harmonic that made the crystal formations tremble. Alex scrambled beside him, inputting codes on the handheld device. The spire began to glow intensely, shifting from pale white to deep lavender. Tendrils of light snaked outward, tracing the glyphs on the platform and continuing in swirling lines along the cavern floor. The entire space vibrated, as though the planet itself stirred in response. Is it working? Ray shouted over the rising hum. Alec checked the device. Energy levels are stabilizing, but we need a final input sequence. He pressed more buttons, and the spire suddenly flared, brilliance radiating in all directions. A violent tremor shook the cavern. Chunks of rock fell from above, splashing into the molten depths. Lyra cried out as she stumbled, almost slipping over the edge, but Ray lunged, catching her arm and pulling her to safety. Hang on, he shouted, heart pounding. The spire's light pulsed faster and faster, as if in rhythm with the quake. Cracks appeared in the platform, threatening to collapse under them. Alec frantically tapped the device, sweat streaming down his face. Finally, the quake subsided, leaving them panting and shaken. The spire's glow stabilized, transitioning into a steady, soft radiance. Alec exhaled. That should do it. They watched as the swirling lines of energy on the cavern floor faded into a gentle glimmer, like afterimages. The rumbling ceased, leaving a hush broken only by the distant bubbling of molten rock. Carefully, Ray checked on Lyra, who seemed unharmed, just rattled. She looked at him, voice trembling with relief. We did it. The farmland above should be safe now. Alec nodded, beaming. It will take time for the tectonic stress to fully dissipate, but we've stabilized the worst of it. We should get out of here before more aftershocks hit. Ray couldn't agree more. They retraced their steps through the tunnels, though the return journey felt lighter, buoyed by success. Eventually, they emerged under the open sky, greeted by anxious villagers. When Alec confirmed that the spire had been activated, the crowd erupted in cheers, some even dropping to their knees in gratitude. Lyra assured them the immediate danger had passed. Ray stood off to one side, blinking under the bright afternoon sun. He felt an unfamiliar sense of fulfillment. He had actually helped people, not for money or personal gain, but because it was the right thing to do. Lyra approached him, her silver hair catching the sunlight. You've saved lives today. This was no mere symbolic gesture. By our laws, your final trial is complete. He gave a weary grin. That means I'm free, right? No betrothal, no death sentence. She lowered her gaze, a complex emotion passing across her features. Yes, you are free. He waited for the surge of joy he'd expected, but instead, a subtle pang of something else tugged at him. Regret, perhaps, or a realization that the ordeal had brought him closer to Lyra than he ever intended. They returned to the palace the following day, greeted by a tumultuous celebration. Word of Captain Calder's success in the southwestern region had spread throughout Velmara, and throngs of citizens lined the streets, cheering as the royal transport glided in. As soon as they disembarked, King Tavir summoned them to the throne room. Ray stood before the dais, the court gathered in a ring of anticipation. Tavir, resplendent in regal attire, rose, voice echoing. Captain Ray Calder, you have proven your valor in the labyrinth of echoes, braved the cosmic fury of the Valley of Tempests, and now safeguarded our people by activating the planetary spire. You have completed the 3 trials. In doing so, you have earned the right to forego any obligation of marriage to my daughter. Furthermore, you have our eternal gratitude. A roar of approval swept through the court. Ray bowed, a mixture of relief and lingering uncertainty swirling in his mind. As soon as the king's pronouncement was complete, an official stepped forward with a ceremonial scroll. This is your official pardon from the betrothal contract, sealed by the royal signet. Ray glanced at Lyra, who watched him from a few steps behind her father. Her smile was tinged with sadness. He accepted the scroll quietly, mind racing with what came next. There would be no wedding. He was free to go, to resume his life among the stars. That had been the goal all along, hadn't it? King Tavir cleared his throat. Our people rejoice in your accomplishment. And yet, we cannot ignore the prophecy that the spire's rightful bearer would be bound by destiny to Velmara's future. Even so, we abide by the law. Your trials are complete. With that, the king gestured for the crowd to depart. Soon, only Ray, Lyra, and a handful of royal guards remained. Tavir descended the dais and placed a hand on Ray's shoulder, a rare gesture of amicability. You are free to leave, Captain. I will ensure your ship is refueled and provided with any supplies you need. Ray bowed respectfully. Thank you, Your Majesty. Despite everything, I appreciate that I had a chance to help your people. Tavir gave a nod. Our planet owes you a debt. Should you ever wish to return, our doors remain open. With that, the king swept out of the hall, guards in tow. Lyra lingered, stepping forward once they were alone. She stood there, searching his face. So, this is goodbye, she said softly. Ray swallowed, uneasy. I guess so. Everything I've done was to earn my freedom. Now that I have it, I should be happy. But, she tilted her head. But, he hesitated, struggling to find the words. Somewhere along the way, the idea of leaving Velmara, leaving you. It feels more complicated than I expected. Lyra's eyes glistened. I had no desire to force a marriage on anyone. But over these days, I've seen qualities in you: bravery, compassion, resilience. I can't deny I've grown fond of you. Emotions twisted in Ray's chest. In truth, he hadn't expected this. But he also couldn't deny he felt something for Lyra. From the very start, she'd been an ally, helping him navigate Velmara's traditions, risking her own standing with her father. Yet, the life he knew existed among the stars, in the cockpit of the starbound rogue. Could he give that up? He took her hands gently. I don't know what to say. I feel the same way, but my life, it's out there. I'm not princely material. She laughed softly, a tear escaping the corner of her eye. It's not about that. Velmara is changing, just as you've changed it by saving so many lives. If you wanted, you could come and go, a bridge between our world and others. You wouldn't have to be tied down by royal duties. Ray let her words sink in, heart pounding. It all seemed surreal. A royal princess offering him the freedom to remain who he was, yet also stay close to her. Would King Tavir ever permit that? If her father had orchestrated the betrothal for political advantage, he might not embrace an unconventional arrangement. But after Ray's feats, perhaps the king would be more flexible. He brushed a silver strand of her hair behind her ear. Princess, are you asking me to consider staying? Or at least, not leaving forever? She nodded, a shy smile forming. Yes, I don't want to lose what we've built here, no matter how unexpected. Stay, if only for a time, and see if there's a place for you in Velmara's future and in mine. A swirl of emotions coursed through him. Relief, excitement, apprehension. He realized that part of him, a big part, wanted to say yes. The trials had forged a bond. And while he cherished his freedom, maybe there was a new form of freedom waiting here, among the crystalline spires and swirling skies of Velmara. He lifted her hands to his lips, pressing a soft kiss. Then, I'll stay. I'll talk to your father. See if we can work out an arrangement that respects both our worlds. No forced marriage, just a genuine partnership, if that's what we both choose. Lyra's eyes shone. She leaned in, resting her forehead against his, a tender moment blossoming amid the grandeur of the throne room. Thank you, Ray. A contented laugh escaped him. Thank you, Lyra. For everything. A swirl of cosmic energy seemed to dance in the air around them, as if the planet itself blessed their choice. And in that quiet hush, Captain Ray Calder realized he had found something he never expected, a place where he belonged. Months later, Velmara thrived. The southwestern provinces, once threatened by geological upheaval, flourished with renewed stability. Farmers reaped bountiful harvests, praising the day Captain Calder came to their aid. In the royal palace, the ancient labyrinth had become a site of respectful curiosity, its illusions studied by Velmaran scholars to better understand the planet's psychic energies. As for Ray, he found himself neither prisoner nor purely a freighter pilot. He split his time between Velmara and the stars, using the starbound rogue to establish trade routes and alliances with neighboring systems, returning frequently to the planet he now called a second home. King Tavir, seeing the benefits of forging deeper ties with off-world traders, begrudgingly came to approve of Ray's free-spirited role. Princess Lyra, no longer bound by archaic laws of forced betrothal, flourished as well. She took a more active hand in governance, traveling with Ray on diplomatic missions, bridging Velmara's ancient traditions with a more modern, inclusive vision. Over time, she and Ray grew closer, forging a partnership that was rooted in mutual respect and genuine affection. One evening, after an especially lively festival celebrating the planet's harvest, Ray and Lyra strolled together through the palace gardens. Lanterns glowed among flowering vines, and the gentle hum of night-blooming crystals filled the air with a faint luminescence. Stopping near a pond filled with bioluminescent fish, they gazed at their reflections dancing on the water's surface. We've come a long way, Ray mused, recalling the day he had first set foot on Velmara with the mysterious artifact in hand. I was sure I'd be gone the next day. Lyra smiled, slipping her arm through his. And you ended up saving an entire region, braving impossible trials, and, she paused, cheeks flushing in that lovely lavender hue. Winning my heart as well. Ray grinned, heart fluttering. I guess there are some things I don't mind being trapped into, after all. She laughed softly, leaning her head on his shoulder. They stood that way for a while, simply enjoying the quiet symphony of night. Overhead, Velmara's rings glowed in the starlight, an eternal reminder of the beauty and wonder that could be found in even the most unexpected places. In time, their hands entwined, and they continued their walk, discussing the trade missions they would embark upon next month, the new systems eager to establish relations, and the potential for forging an alliance that could change the face of their corner of the galaxy. A future once defined by illusions and cosmic fury now shimmered with hope and shared purpose. And so, as the night sky shimmered with infinite possibilities, Captain Ray Calder, once a lone drifter, walked side by side with Princess Lyra of Velmara, embracing the destiny they had shaped together. In the end, neither death nor forced marriage claimed him. Instead, he found a new life, a new love, and a planet that welcomed him not as an outsider, but as a hero, a friend, and, perhaps one day, a partner in every sense of the word.